Hi everyone, it's nice to see you here. I'm a bit shaking as usually. So today I'm going to talk about the Next.js. By the way, thanks Tony for the introduction. So as some of you know, we have React.js, which is a library, by the way, and Next.js is a framework which is built on top of the React. And the good thing about it that it provides you a lot of built-in blocks for creating web applications fast. And this is, by the way, their quote from the Next.js website. So currently, Next.js contains a lot of built-in blocks which allows you to do it faster, like routing, data fetching, some extra tools which allows you to connect to the database quickly or integrate some e-commerce or OAuth solutions faster. So this is the third thing. Let's go further. So this is a not the popularity, but here you can see on this chart how many users, developers, are using different frameworks nowadays. So here we have these frameworks, which is like Nuxt, Gatsby, Remix, Astro, and on this chart you can see the usage. So this is percentage, which means that users would use it again after they tried it already. And the Next.js is like one of their populars here. Next one is retention rate. So like how many users basically would use it again after they used it. It's similar to the usage, but it's slightly different. And the funny thing, like nowadays in the current state, we have here like our new green friend, which is Astro. So Astro is quite new, and people love it basically. Sweatle is quite high as well, but the Gatsby you can see that just like goes all the way down because Next.js, for example, already covers static generation for the websites. Like overall experience with the framework with the Next.js in general is quite good, and you can see that. After someone uses it, for example, with the Nuxt, they just like, no, not gonna use it again anymore. Remix goes quite okay, and the Next.js overall is quite high, so people enjoy to work with this framework. Today's topic is not like only about the routing itself, it's gonna be more about all the new things which they gonna ship soon. It's currently in the beta status, but you already can use a lot of them. But I'm gonna start from the routing. So what's the routing in general? Routing, it's the way how the network basically distributes your requests to specific URLs. Currently, Next.js, they support they have this page system or folders system. Basically, when you put anything into the page folder, it became your route within your app. You can do it. So let's go further. Sorry. You have like dynamic routes, which allows you to build dynamic routes. Like you can see it here. By using Slack or 3 dots Slack. If you go back, so basically here you have the top level route, which is index, which is going to be your root one. Then inside of it you can have the dashboard, and inside of it, if you can have like, for example, if we're going to talk about the library, it can be books. And the side of it, you can have like Slack, which is going to be in the square braces with a name like book name or whatever. And then it's going to be your new route, which is going to be, for example, books Next.js. Beside that, from the box, this is again, it's like the current state of the Next.js. It supports layouts, and it has like two types: per page layout or single global layout, and data fetching, which is get static props or get server-side props. So about the data fetching, it basically allows you to do two different things, like to have everything server-side rendering or statically rendering. Get static props, it's usually used when you want to statically render websites, and afterwards you can cache it and it's going to be quite fast. Besides that, if you have some dynamic interaction with the website, you can always have these so-called increment statically generated websites. It means that your website is going to be revalidated after a specific amount of time, and it's going to be like a new static will be generated. So if we can talk about, Sorry.
Are you taking questions as you go through the presentation?
Sure.
I have a question about the previous slide. One thing that I dislike about this nested routing is that you have multiple index.js or tx or whatever files.
Yeah.
Is there a way to handle that? For example, inside Pages, you have a file that's called pages.js, and that it wouldn't get rendered as a sub route or like a, what's the word?
Yeah.
Child route.
Yeah.
Is there a way to fix this problem?
Sorry, did you get what was the problem?
I think you can
The problem
provide.
is that you have multiple index.js files. And
Like
it's
inside
not
of
a problem in
one
itself, but
folder,
in
right?
your editor,
Yeah.
I usually use the file name, like if I'm searching across the code base, I know that this is in that kind of file, and here you need to kind of navigate the file
So
structure.
you have too many index.js, so you click Control-P or Command-P
Yeah.
in editor to write the file name, and you only have indexes. So you type index, and there is a huge choice. It's hard to understand which file belongs to which route.
Yeah.
Yeah, the answer no.
VS Code will put also the directory aside.
Yeah, but
Yeah, that's gonna be only the way.
In which directory belongs to.
When you're searching for a file, or
Yeah.
when it shows the file name?
When it shows the file name with Control P, so
yeah, but it's not. You cannot change the index to something else.
Yeah, that,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah, but it's true, like if you have a lot of components, you will end up
maybe you could
searching
have,
that you get a huge list.
you could have index.js like empty and just importing the all stuff from some other file.
Let's go further. So this is layout state. It's a single shared layout with a custom app. So basically, in the current implementation of the Next.js, you have two root files. One is load-app.js, another one load-document.js, and this is your entry point. This is how Next renders everything. So basically, if you specify anything in the app.js, it's going to be shared across all your routes, across all your pages. It's going to be powerful, it's going to be good, but it also has its limitations currently. You can imagine you can have, for example, landing page and you have details page. And it might be that you will want to have different layouts based on the page type. In the current implementation, it's not possible if it's going to be like a global shared layout. But at the same time, they also have per page layouts. And these layouts, they are nested. So basically, you can define in the components folder your another layout which you want to render on the page. And here you have this get layout property where you specify what kind of layout it's supposed to use. And the page here is going to be your page, your children basically, which will be rendered inside of this nested layout component. And then in the app.js, you also need to specify that it should use layout from the page. Next.js app routing. So before I go to the next slide, this one, I just want to remind you that this is in beta, but they are quite strong in their implementation of all these new things, and they have the roadmap, like what kind of things supposed to be built for the next version of the Next.js and almost all the features already implemented. So some cool things which they introduced is app directory. It's kind of the same as the pages, but it's more flexible. So they learned all the mistakes which they did when they were developing the page, the folder structure within the page. It's still possible to use both things simultaneously if you want to experiment, like with app, for example, in some way. Then they, by the default, from now all their routing is server-centric with the client-side navigation. So what does it mean? Like, it means that all the routes, besides that they are server-side centric, they also gonna be with the server-side rendering components. I'm gonna talk about it a bit later. Then they have the partial routing, server and client components, metadata, Next.js case, Rust MDX parser. It's like one of the features which they introduced in the new version. And for example, yeah, I know, they're all cool. They can improve the performance of their website dramatically. Next.js app routing. So basically, this is what changed. So they reworked a bit the way how they've been working. So if you will if you will take a look on this picture, for you it's gonna be the same as it was with the pages. You still have this folders routing structure, but in the same time they did some changes. So from now on, you're gonna have specific files within each folder. It's gonna be layout, template, error, loading, not found, page, and route.js. That's kind of the problem to which Peter was referring, that there is no longer index.js, for example, but there's gonna be a lot of page.js or layout.js. So this is not possible to avoid. If we gonna talk about it, how it looks hierarchically, then this is what kind of picture do we have. So layout itself is responsible for the layout of the page, and it's persisted across all the routes. So when you navigate from one page to another one by using, for example, client-side navigation with the link component, then layout will not be re-rendered. It's gonna be persisted, and it's also persist the state which it receives. Then we have there, it's not here actually, but beside that we have the template JS, this one, this guy. This guy, it's kind of the same as the layout, but it's not persistent. So when you navigate from one route to another one, it will be re-rendered, regenerated, and we're gonna have like a new state. So the error.js by itself, it's built on top of the React error bundling, loading on top of the React suspense, if I'm not mistaken. And this is, you can see here, the way how it's gonna be. So you have your root, which is a dashboard, for example, and then all the things inside, they're gonna be rendered inside of that error layout with the error boundary and with the suspense. And this is what you see on the left side here, where's layout, error, and loading. Afterwards, you have, if you define like another route by using settings, then it will have his, and it has his own layout. It's optional in this case. Then all the things, they will be rendered inside of it. So you're gonna have your nested layout basically.
So it means if you have a deep folder structure, you will have an awful component tree.
Yeah.
So this seems like an approach that also React in general is suggesting nowadays. They created a new hook called use, which makes use of exactly those two things, so error boundaries and suspense for the loading state. So you can do also this just totally on the front.
Yeah, so basically Next.js or Vercel organization, they collaborate a lot with the React team. And it's like two-way communication.
Yeah.
So Next.js, they implementing some things from the React and React learning things from the Next.js. And that's why they using this error boundary and suspense, which comes from the React. It's React 18.
Yeah.
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 So
Yeah. My question is, like Michael was mentioning, like you might have a lot of nested components structure or pages structure. Is it mandatory to have always the error?
No.
Okay.
it's
So
all optional. Yeah.
So you can catch your boundary.
Yeah. It's basically it means where you're gonna see your error or loading state. Yeah.
So you can catch, in theory, you can have only one error boundary at the
Yes.
top and just catch all of your
Yeah,
errors.
but then all your layout gonna be scraped, and only that error boundary will render that error, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can think that in case if you have some lazy loading and you want to make sure that you, like one component failed and you don't want to scrape all the other content from the page, in this case, error boundary will be helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The next thing which they introduced is called partial rendering. So that's quite great, actually. So basically, you can imagine that you have your dashboard, which is this page. And then inside of that page, you navigate from one sub-route to another one. Like from the analytics, for example, to their, what do you have there? To the settings. And in this case, only the inside part of this page will be re-rendered. All the rest stuff will stay in place. So they use, as I mentioned, the layout which is around this route is persisted. That's why it will not be rendered, and only the thing inside will be rendered. But in case if you will reload the page, you're gonna have your hard reload, and everything will get the new route to the server. There's like quite cool thing which I also want to show you. It's in the browser. Michael, I don't know. Help me. Oh, there is. Yeah. So basically, the Vercel, they have like a lot of cool stuff. For example, super dynamic documentation where you can learn stuff to see how things are working. And for example, they have this thing which is called grouped layout. And this is, oh yeah, thanks. So here you can see that you have your main layout, which is this thing. And when you navigate from the home to the electronics, in this case, we have another layout around all these things. So basically what this guy did, by default, we have the layout, which is root layout, which is mandatory to have for all the applications. It's going to be like, top level root layout. And afterwards, you can specify different layouts by having it inside of their pages, or in our case, roots. But if you're gonna go to the next thing, which is the clothing, it's within the same layout. And in this case, you can see that only things which are inside will be rendered. If you go deeper inside of the clothing things, and we're gonna filter it by tabs, shirts, all the things inside gonna be rendered. So this is a significant improvement performance-wise, because you have less renderings on the page, and all the things, they are server-side pre-rendered up in the beginning. And only their dynamic content will be rehydrated on the client-side components, basically. Okay. So in the new Next.js, they have so-called advanced routing patterns, which is intercepting routes, parallel routes, and the combination of the two things from above and the conditional routes. Well, let's talk a bit about each of them. So the intercepting routes. Nowadays, this is like one of their use cases where you would like to have this. For example, you have the page which contains some photos, like photo gallery, for example. And when you click on the photo gallery, it's renders in the model. And in case if you want to share this state with someone, then you will need to change your URL basically, and yeah, you will need to find a way somehow how the other person will receive the content of the model. So what they done, they created this so-called intercepting routes, and when you click on their image, it actually updates your route in the browser, but it doesn't update the layout of the page. And this is done on the client side dynamically. But when you will share this page with your friend or where it can be, then the content of this model will be rendered on that side. So for example, you have your Facebook, and at Facebook, you have your widget. And if you will paste the link to your model, then only their things inside of it will be rendered. What's going on?
I'm showing now exactly the example you have.
Okay.
So you can click a picture here, you see it's a pop-up.
Yeah.
It has a separate route, but it's a pop-up. But if I refresh this page, it's not a pop-up anymore. The same URL, but the different look.
Yeah. So this is the same thing, yeah. Thanks.
Is this built in Next.js?
Instagram?
Instagram?
No.
No.
It's just an example of this behavior.
Yeah, it's an interesting technique, I would say. So to achieve this one, you will need to use, where is it? This thing. They have this pattern, like pattern which describes that route gonna be intercepted. You have these two dots inside of their braces, round braces. And then the Next.js will understand that, all right, so this guy is supposed to be rendered when we, in the same layout when a user clicks on it, but if it will be shared, it's gonna use his own layout structure for all the things. Then we have the parallel routes. So that's slightly different. It allows you to simultaneously render one or more pages in the same view. By the pages, we are talking about these small routes. That's why it's called parallel routes. And it can be useful for the dashboards. And yeah, it's created by its own, how do you say, yeah, named slots, which it's just like another way to think how you can do this. They think properly about how to separate different logic, like intercepted layouts, routes, the parallel routes. So for example, here we have the page, like a dashboard, for example, and you are rendering two routes within the same page, like these tab groups, basically. And each of them is a separate route. So when you navigate from this route to this one, it will not affect the content of this route.
So it means this address in the address bar has information about both routes?
Yeah, so currently this analytics, it refers only to this guy here. But if you're gonna click here, it will be changed to their another information. So here's an example. The slots, they starting with their @ symbol, and or like @ views, @ audience, and basically when you navigate from their within the one routes group, then the URL will be changed, like to the analytics impressions or analytics view duration. But in the same time, if you reload the page, your audience gonna be rendered with the same default state which you had before. So that route which you're gonna have here, it basically describes what content is active on the page.
You always have a default one.
Yeah, you also have a default one. So basically, in this case, it's gonna be just analytics. Or if you're gonna choose another one, it's gonna be impressions or view durations, whatever it's gonna be. So basically, you have one layout which contains two different rows. Yeah, it's. I think in some certain way, you can think about this as a replacement for the hashes in the route, but in this case, it will be more SEO friendly. Yeah, so this is the way how it looks like in the code. So we have the layout, which receives two things, views and audience. And these are our guys. This one subroute and this is another one. The next cool thing is the server and client components. So finally, we got our server-side components in the React. We didn't have it before, but the Next.js in React 18, they introduced it, and the Next.js, they started using it a lot. So all the components inside of the app directory are React server components by default, which means that it's SEO-friendly by default for the user, and if you need to specify what kind of information is supposed to be dynamically dynamic, then you need to stress it out by specifying that it's gonna be the client-side component, and you're doing it by using the directive which is called useClient on top of their component. Cool thing that you can have server-side, so you can have like the client-side components inside of their server-side components. And you can think about it like, if you remember one of the first slides, there was like an Astra framework. So what Astra does, Astra pre-renders everything on the backend on the server side and specifies what kind of components can be dynamic. It's also so-called like islands pattern, where you are saying like, okay, I have my static page, but only these certain things going to be dynamic and you can interact with them. So nowadays it's possible in the Next.js by doing the server side and the client side components. When to use these guys? So the server components, they are perfect for fetching data, for the access backend resources, keep sensitive information, keep large dependencies on the server. So if you have some, I don't know, DNS, DFN library, it's most likely better to keep it on the backend or IATN. Client components, they're perfect for interactivity. If you have like use state, like lifecycle events, also there, some browser events for all these interactions. Server side, it's also good to remember that there's like some things where stuff can go sideways. So for example, it's preferable to have their client components at the end of the leaves. And by saying end of the leaves, it's more like their furthest route on the tree. So if we're gonna talk about, if we are talking about the routing tree, which we have like an app directory, then the last one is gonna be the leaf of the tree. Why it's better to have it there? Because in this case, you will make sure that the all content which is before it is going to be server-side rendered, and only this part going to have this dynamic manipulation. Then we have, also remember that it's not possible to import server-side components inside of the client-side components. You're just not allowed, this will break. Then we have passing props from server to client components. In this case, you need to serialize it. It's not possible to do it like simply like, for example, functions. You cannot just like pass the function from the server side. You need to serialize it. Then keeping server-only code out of client components. So that's also possible if you want to make sure that you have some server-side components and by mistake someone can use it on the client side. In this case, you need to install the server-only package, and it's has kind of the same way to declare that this component is server only, like we saw it for the client, when in the top of the file you specify like use client and that's it. Then we have the last thing, I think, is going to be the create context. It's not supported in the server components, which is understandable, I think. And a few more things to discuss. So this is like, because we got currently server-side components, we finally can do streaming. And that situation which we're having right now. So currently, when you work with React frameworks or libraries in general, or like Next.js in our case, it doesn't have the streaming ability. So what can I do? Just can pre-render everything on the server side, and then it's gonna be passed from the server to the client. So you need to wait until some calls will be made to the backend, and it affects your scores. And in case if you have some CO, it's SEO, then, for example, something like time to first byte metric is gonna just suffer a lot. With the server-side components, you can define granularly what kind of things they're gonna be shipped in chunks. So by default, it's gonna be, as before, just rendered on the server side and passed. But then you can say, okay, I have some specific goals, like to retrieve some grandma information or whatever, some weather information. And for this kind of stuff, I want to do it in parallel by using suspense operation. And in this case, you're gonna specify that, okay, these guys, you can render this page, but these guys, they will come to you a bit later. So you don't need to wait for them, just render the page and they will be shipped when they're required. And this is good, and this is improves your metrics significantly, like time to first byte. So basically, before it was only one long line here, but now by specifying like different things in the parallel, you can say, okay, you don't need to wait. Okay, I don't need to wait. So time to interaction improves, and all the rest things they will be shipped further. This is how it looks like in the code. So basically, you can have like extra things on top of it, and then you have the suspense things where you specify what's supposed to be loaded further. And in case it's not visible here, but in the Next.js, in the beta version, they introduced they're thinking the way how they interact with their API responses. So now you can use only the fetch. You don't need to use get static props or get server-side props. Just use normal fetch API, which supports in the browser as well. And the last thing which they introduced, it's CO and metadata things. It's like static metadata, dynamic metadata, and JSON all this. So back in the days,
I guess a question about the one before. How would you model the use case for infinite scrolling for posts or something? Would you use something like this?
Yeah, definitely. Because I mean, like, even nowadays, you don't need to wait for it. Because what you're gonna do, you're just gonna pre-render the page with some feed for the first page, for example, on the server side. And then when you scroll it down, then on client side, you're making like extra requests to prefetch extra information. And then you can use different techniques, how you can cache data, for example. Because in case if you reload the page and you want to be in the same scrolling position, then you can store it somewhere, for example, like in the local storage.
Because on the front, like a single page application, usually there is a React query, which is you can use for this. But I was wondering if there is something similar that you can use also on the back end to cache.
Yes, so nowadays Next.js introduced two new things for caching. One for their API caches, and another one for their for the page caches, basically. So within the new cache techniques, they have this network only, and revalidate on every call or revalidate manually. So it's like that thing you have also within the React query or Apollo client or any other library.
Right. Thanks.
So while I'm showing this, Facebook uses partial loading. I don't know how to lower the network speed for Safari, but if you usually enter Facebook, you see some parts immediately showing up, and some are just loading after you already can see, for example, you saw the stories on top were loaded immediately, but then the content loaded after the render. So the menus, something else is already from the server, passed from the server, and then some other parts are just loading on. And Facebook is using React.
No, we've been using like at MarkPlus quite the same technique. So at MarkPlus, if you open some page, for example, with the details page, but that one was pure React and Node.js basically.
Oops, not Marketplace.
MarkPlus. Yeah, and just enter some item. So you can see like a lot of things they were rendered on the server side, and all the rest they were received on the client. So for example, this thing which is their biddings, they are client side only, because for the SEO it's not important to know like what kind of bids you done there. On the server side we are shipping here the characteristics, the hero image, then their location of the user. All the rest stuff is dynamic, because you don't need to have like other advertisements, important title, description. Yeah. So you have to keep in mind what things are important for the SEO, for the first user, because you need to find the balance between their time to interaction, between their LCP and other metrics. And most of them, they're important not only for their Google bot, for example, but for the user as well. And this is where like another thing comes, it's metadata. So nowadays it's possible to use this API, which is called just like a metadata object, basically, which you export from their component. And in this case, Next.js will understand like what's supposed to be shipped as a metadata for this specific page. In case if you need, if you have some dynamic metadata, then you can use fetching, like some data fetching functions, and then you can generate it on the fly as well. Something changed.
And I think I read just yesterday there is also something that I'm really looking into myself is dynamic generation of thumbnails with the graphic.
Yes.
That's also pretty good.
Yes.
So you
That's
can generate on your backend preview of the link, the shareable picture when you share
Yeah.
a link dynamically on Next with their API.
But for that part, you will need to use most like a Vercel or your like local. Yeah. And the last, I think, is a JSON LD. This is quite important as well. JSON LD.
There's something wrong there.
Yeah, something wrong. We got the different screen. So basically, JSON LD is like Open Graph text. You can describe what kind of things Google will read from the page, and if you have some rich snippets like reviews or some search bar, then this kind of stuff can appear on the Google search result page as well. And for these things, you're using usually JSON LD or metadata. I forgot the name of a different technique. And basically, Next.js, they have it out of the box, and you only need to specify the object itself, and yeah, it's already part of it. That's quite great. So back in the days, like from my experience, I had the problem with the metadata, because you have before only one place where you are managing different metas, and it was app.js. load-up.js file. It's like an entry file for all the pages. And nowadays you can just define granularly where to use what, like on what kind of page. And yeah, I would say this is a great words from the Guillermo Ronch. He is a SEO of the Versal. Like, keep in mind the extremes are harmful. So back in the days, we've been using a lot of their only server or only client. Then it was like all static or all dynamic, and all these things they can hurt. And by having these new features in the Next.js beta, we can balance it, and we can find the better way how to ship the better product for the user. Some resources which I can recommend is this Machine Magazine blog about how app directory works, and the Next.js documentation, because they have like everything. Thanks.